everybody. Welcome to today's Shop Talk. I'm Michael Beckelheimer, your host. This is our series on U.S.-Russian culture. And during this series, I'm talking to Americans about the effect Russia has on their creative work. By effect, I mean inspiration. How Russians and Americans influence each other, what we learn from each other. Today, I'm talking to Molly Gartland. She's the author of a fantastic novel called The Girl from the Hermitage, which is available on the American Center's bookstore, and we'll give you a link in the chat. Today's program is presented by the Washington-based Forum for Cultural Exchange in coordination with the American Center of Moscow and the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. So today's session, like the others, will last for an hour. That includes time for questions and answers. All of you who are watching on the American Center YouTube and VK pages or Telegram, please post comments and questions. They'll be delivered to me about halfway through our session, but you can start sending in your questions whenever you're ready. At the end of the session, we'll provide a link to the survey. If you want to fill it out, please do. That helps us create better programming for you. We'll also, as I said, have a link to Molly's book. So my name is Michael Beckelheimer. I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C. I'm here in the offices of the Forum for Cultural Engagement. I heard of Molly's book on a Facebook group page for expats, Americans, Brits, others who lived in Russia, Moscow in the 90s. And it's a fun group where people post pictures and sort of keep in touch and, you know, have some nostalgia for the old days of that period. But that book that she wrote, really, it caught my attention because I lived there and I was really interested in understanding how this American author had been inspired by Russia in the 90s and ended up writing a book. And that's sort of what this series is all about. And as I read her book, I was transported back to the 90s, but also back to Leningrad in 1941, which, of course, I wasn't in Leningrad in 1941, but having lived in Russia, was very familiar with what Leningrad was like during the siege. And it's such a fascinating story. And Molly really builds on that experience to tell just a wonderful account of how life evolved in Russia from the 40s to today. But one thing that didn't change is the love and the need for art. And that's really a central tenet of her book. And it's the reason we're having this conversation today. And Molly, I'm going to introduce you in 1 second, but to set this up, I think the two paragraphs on the back of the book are a great introduction to what your book is about. And I just want to read that really quickly for our audience. In December, it is December 1941, and 8-year-old Galina and her friend Vera are caught in the siege of Leningrad, eating wallpaper soup and dead rats. Galina's artist father, Mikhail, has been kept away from the front to help save the treasures of the Hermitage. Its cellars could provide a safe haven as long as Mikhail can survive the perils of a commission from one of Stalin's colonels. So there's a fantastic story about how Mikhail has to paint a portrait for this colonel of Stalin during the war. 3 decades on, Galina is a teacher at the Leningrad Art Institute. What ought to be a celebratory weekend at her forest dacha turns sour when she makes an unwelcome discovery. The painting she starts that day will hold a grim significance for the rest of her life, as the old Soviet Union makes way for the new Russia and her world changes out of all recognition. So I think all of us on this call are familiar with this general story, and Molly tells it so well in this book. So Molly, welcome. Molly is originally from Michigan. She worked in Moscow from 1994 to 2000, and she's been fascinated by Russian history and culture ever since. She has a master's degree in creative writing from St. Mary's University, Twickenham, and lives in London. The manuscript for her debut novel, The Girl from the Hermitage, was shortlisted for the Impress Prize and longlisted for the Dyslexia Novel Competition, the Bath Novel Award, and the Grindstone Novel Award. So it caused a stir, got a lot of attention. We're here to talk about it today. Molly, welcome to the series. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Let's start with your time in Russia, just to level set. When did you live in Russia and why?
Okay. So the first time I went to Russia was 1993. I was a student in St. Petersburg for a summer, and that's the summer I turned 21. I had my birthday there. And when I came back to America, I had to finish one more year of university. And during that time, the opportunity for an internship, a 1 year work experience in Moscow presented itself. So this was working for a courier company called Pony Express. And it was a company that was just started by two Americans. They were both very young. They were under 30. And they set up this company and they wanted someone to do sales and marketing. So I went, and I was supposed to be there for 1 year doing sales and marketing for Pony Express. And at the time, Pony Express had service between St. Petersburg and Moscow, and that was it. I think it then started to Kiev and to Nizhny Novgorod maybe, but the big company that Pony Express is today, it was nothing like that. It was a very small company when I arrived there.
Well, let me confirm that your experience was probably similar to mine, because you said that an opportunity presented itself. Were you was it your goal to go do sales and marketing for a new company in Russia? Did you know what you were doing when you were there?
So what happened was, when I started university, I was actually a business major studying finance. And I wanted to continue my French studies, but the French class that I needed was full. So I wanted to study some language because I really wanted to move somewhere else. I wanted to live in other countries. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to live in many other countries. And so the languages available were Arabic, Japanese, and Russian. Those were the only classes to me available. And so I'm thinking, this is a country I could potentially live in. And mind you, this is 1990 that this business major student is thinking of these things. And I ticked the box and went for this Russian class. And on the first day of this Russian class, the professor went around the room and he asked everybody, what were they studying? What was their major? And everybody was history and literature and journalism and these kinds of majors. And here I am, the one business major in the room. And he said to me, well, what are you going to do? Spread capitalism around the Soviet Union? And I didn't know what to answer because I hadn't really thought about what am I doing there. But I started studying Russian and I really enjoyed it. Although it was always very difficult for me. And, the next thing you know, the Soviet Union changes considerably and different opportunities start coming up. So when the opportunity came to work there, I thought, yeah, I'll take it. I'll do it.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting about that period is it just sort of pulled a lot of us over there for opportunity and to explore. I was a Russian major, so it made sense for me to be there, but I still look back on that period and think I was doing things for people there that I'm not sure how they thought I could do it, but because I was an American, they wanted my help and they gave me the opportunity. So that made it sort of a crazy time.
Yeah, and I think that was the same with the person who started Pony Express. He set up Federal Express there. So he himself would have been, 24, 25 years old when he went to set up Pony Express in Russia. So it's a bit like your story. And I think he did study Russian, but still it was, huge responsibility. And I think looking back at that time period, you met such fascinating people, both the expats and the Russians that you met during that time period. It was just really interesting people.
And so what I love about your story is you went there as a business major to start a business, find this opportunity, and then you bought a piece of art, and that ultimately changed the trajectory of your life. I mean, that is such a Russian story.
Yeah. And you know, when I bought the painting, it hangs in this room, but you know, never ever did I think, oh, I'll write a novel about this painting down the road. You know, that never occurred to me. And we bought several paintings while we were in Russia, and this is just one of them. And it just happened that one night, I think it must have been 2014, I was Googling about the artist because I didn't know anything about this artist who had painted it. And I found this little biography, and it said that she had survived the siege of Leningrad. And I just started looking at this painting very differently because she painted it in the 70s. And I was thinking about what her life would have been like then. And what is the circumstances that she had to sell this painting, or she decided to sell this painting in the 90s. And I don't know, this idea for this book just came to me. And I started writing, and then I went and did the MA because it's actually quite hard to write a novel. So I needed some help to learn how to write. And so I did that, and the end result is the book.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us briefly about this painting? What is the subject of the painting? What is the mood of the painting? Why did you buy it?
Should I show it to you? It's just here.
Let's see it.
Here, well, it'll just. All right. So the painting is just there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a young girl, and behind her is a whole load of geese. And it's quite a big painting. It hangs over a fireplace. And so it's just a very typical Soviet realism style painting.
It's beautiful. And so for those of you watching who haven't read the book yet, there's this beautiful scene in the book, which, Molly, I think it's just such an inspiring scene, where the main character of the book paints a painting on the shore of a lake. There are geese in the background. It's a painting of a young girl. It's essentially the painting you just showed us. And it's such a beautiful moment. And I think it's so cool how you took that real painting you have and imagined what that scene would be like. And it's a beautiful moment. It's almost out of a Chekhov story, you know, that particular scene in the book, you know, water by the water, so many different emotions happening, a very muted conversations, and just you can feel the drama building. And it's really, really, it's a very heartfelt scene. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
So the way you set the book up is, you know, you just described you bought this painting, you Googled the painter, got a little bit of information about her life. She survived the blockade. And so you set your novel in not just Leningrad in World War II, but in the cellar, the basement of the Hermitage. Mm-hmm. Because the main character's father is there. They are all protecting the art during the war, and they're in the basement. So can you tell us a bit about your preparation for writing about the Hermitage and the art in 1941 during the war?
Yeah. So, you know, I watched a documentary about the Hermitage. I think around the time that I had the idea for this book. And of course, they interviewed different people who had lived there as children during the war in the cellar. And I just thought that that would be a brilliant setting to have this novel set in that time period in the museum. And so I just wove that in, and really all the research that I did for the book, because I had to research different time periods. And I just found that when I would read nonfiction or watch documentaries or listen to interviews, it would give me ideas of what to do with this story, because this isn't, the real artist who painted this painting. She, I take maybe 4 facts from her life, and then the rest, it's just through the research I came up with ideas of how to create a story. So I wove together many different threads to create this story, but most of the things in the book are taken, quite truthfully from things that actually did happen to other people. And I think that helps it to keep some authenticity to it.
Yes. So you did your research for that period. Your book also covers 3 other periods. 1979, when the painting was painted, 1999, when the painting was purchased by a woman in London. I have to tell you, I'm a little slow. It took me a few minutes to realize, oh, wait a minute, this is sort of like a parallel with what actually happened. I was like, why all of a sudden did someone from London calling about this painting? And then you bring us up to the present day, where the Russia of 2016. That's when you were finishing the book. So of those periods, what was the most fascinating period for you to focus on?
I think with the 40s, there was a lot of information to draw on. There's a lot of documented information of people's experiences. So once you started, you start accumulating information. I think the 70s was the most difficult because I didn't want it to sound cliche of the 70s Soviet experience. And I think it's hard to understand really what life is like for ordinary people during that time. So I spoke to friends, and I also felt fiction written during that time was helpful in a way. There was a couple lectures that I went to. So again, to get the feel, but even, friends in the 80s, it was quite similar. So in talking to friends, I could get a pretty good feel of the experience of that time period. And then the 90s, even though I was there during that time, I wasn't following politics. I wasn't following events. I was in my 20s. I was having a really good time. I had, lots of Russian friends and foreign friends. And, it was a very exciting time to be in Moscow. So again, I had to really think about that time period from a different angle, and maybe through more mature eyes as well. And to really, read up on that time period as well, and really think about how that impacted people on a day-to-day basis.
So you mentioned that you read Russian fiction to sort of get into the mode of those periods, and you had mentioned to me in a previous conversation that you read Dovlatov.
Yeah.
To sort of understand the Soviet Union in the 70s, which I think is brilliant. I love Dovlatov. What were those cultural the writers like Dovlatov, maybe some others, who gave you inspiration or opened your eyes in some way to what life was like there?
I think what I really liked about Dovlatov is, kind of the absurdity that went along with, him deciding. I particularly the suitcase is the one that I really like. And so for me, it was really his work that helped. And I know that wasn't everybody's experience, but it was one person's experience. And I think when you're writing a book, that's what you have to remember to make it authentic. It just needs to reflect one person, because nobody is all the same, in any place or any time. There's going to be a variety of views. So it just needs to be authentic, that one person could conceivably make these choices.
Of course. And so one note about Dovlatov, just to make a connection. One of the reasons that point resonated with me, when I was making a documentary about Pushkin, we went to Pushkin Hills, in Mikhailovskaya, where he lived, and in that general area. And our tour guide, I went with a small group just to do research and some filming. And our tour guide he was very old, and he had worked with Dovlatov when Dovlatov was a tour guide at Pushkin's estate.
Yeah, because that's the other book, that Pushkin Hills.
Yeah, Pushkin Hills. And he took us to the little tiny shack where Dovlatov lived. And it was such a great interconnection of these cultural figures. And again, the absurdity, because Dovlatov would give tours and he would make up crazy stuff about Pushkin's life, and be just to sort of have fun with, the serious nature of the tour guides at Mikhailovskaya and how important it was to get everything right. And he would just quote other poets' poems and say, yeah, that was Pushkin, that was Pushkin. He just had fun with it. So I think that that bit of absurdity and that light-hearted humor, I think, is a great way to sort of connect with that Russian sort of feeling. And I think that comes through.
Yeah.
When you were writing the main character, Galya, I mean, you start with her as a young girl in the cellar of the Hermitage, and we go all through her life. What was your relationship with her? And were there particular, like you say, you have to get one person's life right. It has to be authentic for one person. How do you feel about Galya's authenticity as a Russian woman who lived through these periods? And were there any Russian friends that you think are really close to the Galya that you created?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. She is a similar age to a very good friend, her mother. And so often if I was a little bit stuck, I would think, what would Nina Ivanovna do? And I probably even called Natasha and bounced ideas off her. For me, throughout this, it was so important. I was very, very aware that I was writing about a culture that wasn't my own. Mm-hmm. And I knew I really had to get it right. It's a big responsibility that I felt. And so it sounds silly, but this artist, Ludmila Mikhailovna Skipneeva, I just kind of felt like she was sitting on my shoulder the whole time, sort of watching what I was writing. And so I tried my best, and I hope it rings true. I also had different Russian friends read the book, and they made comments, so a variety of people. And then I have an American friend who's a financial analyst, very particular person, and she knows Russian culture and history inside and out, and she's very exact. And she was correcting things that my Russian friends had said. So she was also very helpful. But it was something that I was very, very conscious of, and I didn't do it lightly. because I do realize that it's when you're writing about a culture that isn't your own, and it's in living memory. I think that's the other bit, when there's people alive that are still from that time period, then it really, you have to be very careful.
Right. What were some of the things that you were corrected on that people pointed out and you thought, well, I thought that was right. I guess it's not.
You know, one of the things in the book, so one of my characters, he passes away and there's a bookshelf. And so I asked a friend, what are some titles that you think would be on this bookshelf? And she listed off some books. And that was one of the things that Margot said, that isn't what his name is, this, and she corrected the author's name. So either I took it wrong from the friend, or the friend told me incorrectly. So things like that, and different things about the plot. So there were various things throughout that were very helpful from several Russian readers. And there was a friend of my mother's who's back in Michigan, and she's a Russian, and she's actually an editor in her own right. So, and she very generously read and commented on the manuscript and gave me some feedback. So there were several people that took the time to help me with it.
Mm-hmm. How has the reception been with the book from both Americans and Russians? What do Americans take away from the book? What do they find surprising? What do they ask you about?
I think with the Americans, they generally, not everybody likes a book, that it's impossible to write a book that everybody likes. So, and this book particularly has a very open ending, and some people don't like an open ending at all. So that is just, but endings are funny. Some people like that and some people don't.
Right.
The Americans, though, they generally get what I was aiming to do. Generally, an American knows very little about the Soviet involvement in World War II. And I know this sounds crazy, but every country tells history from their own point of view. So it's not told the same in the same way, and it's true, or maybe it isn't, but the Russian experience is really glossed over, at least when I was a student in the 80s in the Midwest. So I think people do get some idea of what was going on, at least in Leningrad. And then the other big thing that I think they do take away from the book is the 90s. I think a lot of people in the West think the 90s, the Soviet Union fell, and it was just good news for everybody involved. And that wasn't the case. Some people did very, very well and made the adjustment, and some people didn't. And it's a more nuanced picture than just good or bad. So I don't think people in the West appreciate, what a huge change that was. Just a huge change of all the rules of the game, especially for the older generation, to suddenly, have all the rules of the game changed.
Mm-hmm. Do you think people understand, or how do Americans respond to the centrality of art and this painting and sort of the emotion that goes into a painting? And I want to say, when I would, there were a few scenes where either Mikhail or Galina were painting that I think you do a really beautiful job of showing how they sort of transition from the everyday, sort of the concerns that are on their minds, the drama surrounding them, and then with that paintbrush, they just enter into this completely different state where the art is taking them away. And I think you do that in a really beautiful way without being, too flowery or too over the top. It's just sort of this natural progression that they get into their art. And I think that's an important theme in the book about how through these difficult periods, the art and the feeling of the creation of that art really sustains people. So is that something that ever comes up in your discussions with Americans? Like, why is the painting so important?
No, a lot of people comment on the painting scenes. A lot of people ask me if I paint, and the painting scenes, I have to give complete credit to a friend who she lived locally here, and I asked her to read the first manuscript and give me some feedback because she's a professional painter.
Mhm.
And I remember the day she came to discuss it, she turns up with the manuscript. I had printed it out for her, and it was just filled with Post-it notes throughout, much more than just the painting scenes. It was the entire book. And she came in the door. She's American, actually. And she said, I just love collaboration of any kind. And, writing is a very isolated, you don't feel like you're collaborating with anybody. You're a hermit just kind of tapping away at a computer. And suddenly, I had a collaborator, and she was wonderful. She ended up reading the manuscript 4 times, all the way through the process. She read it several times, and even way towards the end, my editor was kind of like, okay, I think we're done. And I said to him, she really wants to read it one last time. Do you mind? He's like, yeah, we've got time. So, let's let her do it. So she was wonderful, really, really wonderful and very helpful. And every time somebody asked me about those scenes, it's all her, really. I mean, she really helped about, what a painter would be thinking about, especially Mikhail, who hadn't been painting recently. So she was really helpful to get into the psyche of the painter.
That's good, and I'm glad to hear she spoke English, because I would read those scenes and I would think, if Molly were getting this information from a Russian painter, I was just going crazy with the vocabulary. I was thinking, how would I ever understand all of this detail in Russian? It would have been overwhelming. But it was really fascinating the way, again, it wasn't too much. It was just, I really felt like I was at the canvas with the painter. And it was, it's very eye-opening how that process works. The process specifically of painting a portrait and understanding what goes into a portrait and the importance of what's in that portrait, particularly the portrait for the Soviet colonel during World War II. Should there be apples on the table? Oh, well, everybody's starving, so maybe we shouldn't put apples on the table. Let's put Pravda on the table. So just that whole setup I thought was really fascinating, interesting. You make a lot of cultural references in the book. Well, a few that I thought were really very specific, and I wanted to ask you about. So one was the candy Mishka na Severie, that is, sort of a through line through the book. There's always a candy from that factory. So were you eating those candies while you were in Moscow?
Yeah, I mean, weren't we all? I mean, they're so beautiful, especially the packaging from before, I think in the early 90s, the packaging was really beautiful. I think, and actually there's an online shop here where we often, my kids like to order these Russian chocolates. So yes, we've been eating them. And actually, originally when I wrote the book, it was Alyonka chocolates, and but then I discovered they weren't they weren't around in the 40s. So then I was like, oh, we got to find something else.
Mhm.
But the Mishka, they were still being, as I recall, they're still being made even during the war. They were still making them.
Yeah. I did a search on Google to learn more about that particular Soviet chocolate, and I thought
It has
how
quite an
perfect.
interesting history. That
Very interesting. And they were eating them, during World War II.
yeah.
So it's everything, there's so many mysteries. It's like, eating ice cream in the snow, they're eating chocolates during while starving during the war. These little tidbits, I think, are just for the paint an interesting picture. You also bring up Vysotsky, and I'm sure that probably reminds you of some that probably reminds you of the 90s and having some fun in Moscow.
Yeah, yeah. I was originally, when I wrote it, I was hoping to use some actual lyrics from Vysotsky, and that means you have to get permission to use them and probably pay a fee. And so I even contacted his lawyer, and like he's the lawyer for the family estate. I'm sure he thought I was crazy. But then it just became too complicated. So instead of using the lyrics, I more describe the song,
Mhm.
and I think it works better than the lyrics. So I think it did the job.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, it's such a Russian musician, and yeah, definitely reminds me of lots of parties at a dacha and all of that.
Mhm.
So yeah, wonderful.
Um, so the artist who painted the original painting, you made initial contact with her, just right, to make sure that you had permission to use the painting, to maybe to post a picture of the painting on your website, I think. What has been your interactions with her, and
Yeah. So
where
what
is she?
happened was, when I had this idea for the book, I
Mhm.
was taking a creative writing class. So I had recently left my job teaching English as a foreign language, and I was kind of not sure what I was going to do next. So I enrolled in this class just for something fun to do. It was never with the idea of I'll write a novel or something like this. This was just a beginner creative writing class. And so I carried on with these classes, and then I got the idea for this novel, and I thought, oh, maybe I should contact her and learn more about her. And I think I even sent a letter to the gallery that had posted some of her work in the bio. She lives in Ekaterinburg now. Um, so, but then I started thinking about it, and I could just hear my creative writing teacher saying, why would you talk to her when you could create this story?
Hmm.
Research these time periods and learn more about it, and weave together this story. So I didn't have contact with her, and then when I was finished and the book was going to be published, I wanted to put the portrait onto my website, and in order to do that, you do need to have permission. So I called the artists union in Ekaterinburg. And again, she gave me these phone numbers, and I called this woman, and so she's in her 80s, and I'm sure she was very surprised, and I was very nervous about calling her because I didn't want her to be upset or angry or anything like that. And I just said to her, I bought your painting in the 90s, and it's inspired me to write this novel. And she was delighted because she saw that her piece of creative work
Mhm.
has inspired more creativity. And she just thought that was great. and so she sent me an email with her permission, and I've put it up on the website. But I haven't had any contact with her since then. I did send her a copy of the book as well. Even though she doesn't speak English, I thought, okay, I'll send her a copy of the book, because she, I never would have had the idea had I not seen her bio. So yeah, it was really good.
So this is an interesting aspect of the creative process, because on the one hand, you have the Russian artist sitting on your shoulder, making sure that the story you tell is authentic, that all of the information is correct, the facts are correct, the representation of Russia is correct and authentic. But then you also have a creative writing professor or instructor who's helping you craft a story.
Yeah.
So was there any tension between the liberties you needed to take with the facts or with the reality of Russian history, and what the story needed, the structure needed, or the plot needed?
Because the people aren't real, you can take whatever liberty you want. The book I'm working on now is real people. And so their life doesn't fit necessarily into an arc of a story. And so then it does get much more difficult of what are you going to include and what are you not going to include. So it's much more difficult if it's real people you're writing. So with a real person, you're given the story. This is what's happened, the basic, fundamentals of their life as best as you know them. Whereas with Hermitage, they were all fictional characters. So you could change names, you could change places, you could change, you could change quite a lot, because it was pure fiction. So there's a freedom in that. Whereas when it's a real person, it's yeah. Should you change? And I now understand why so much historical fiction, that they'll stray quite far from the real facts of a particular person, because that person's, it doesn't fit the arc of a story, to make it interesting to read or to watch. So it's kind of a different thing. So with Hermitage, there was more, you could take a lot of liberty, provided, like I said, most of the things had happened to somebody. And I just wove together all those different ideas.
But the facts of Russian history, to me, that seems pretty solid.
Yeah, the fact of, and I think a lot of that is because, a lot of the character and the plot is drawn from actual nonfiction and interviews and real things that happen. But it just didn't happen to one person. It's many people that I've knitted together to make these characters.
What's your favorite scene in the book? This is a question from the audience. They're starting to come in. What scene was the hardest to write?
Oh, gosh. That's difficult. I think, the opening of a book is something an author writes and rewrites and rewrites and rewrites and rewrites. So the whole idea of when a book opens and how the book opens, I never realized how important an opening is, because you've got, I don't know, 10, 15 pages maybe to draw a reader in. And after that, many people will give up if they don't like it. So the opening's very tricky always. Yeah, there were some scenes that were I remember feeling very upset, afterwards. And that sounds silly, but, and even, with the book I'm currently writing, it involves a woman who has many, many miscarriages. And the last one, which is the last one, when I wrote this scene, and I've never had to experience this, I just, after writing so many of these scenes, I just felt, exhausted by it. I can't imagine how she must have felt. So yeah, I'd say there were many scenes. It's hard to choose a favorite because it is like, it's like a child, and you can't choose your favorite bit.
I will say about the opening, how much I liked it. And I say that because I typically don't read historical fiction, and especially historical fiction about Russia, because I'm so committed to, I just want to really, I want the real experiences. I want to understand what really happened. And I don't want, I'm not smart enough to separate the, the creative liberty from the real facts. But reading your book, I really, in that opening scene, in the winter, during the blockade in Leningrad, walking through the streets, I really felt like the detail about life at that moment in that place, it felt real, it felt authentic, it felt like what I'd read about in the history books. And I think the way you uncovered the situation in Leningrad during the siege, the blockade, it was so subtle and nuanced and beautiful. And I specifically chose the word uncovered because I'm thinking, of course, about the bodies that were in the snow, and some of them had been covered and some of them hadn't been covered yet. And I thought that was just such an interesting way to show how people were dealing with having to walk through all of the pain and suffering and keep trudging on every day. That was the story of the blockade. And I just thought it was a really wonderful way to introduce readers to what that was really like, without throwing in a bunch of facts, without being too in your face. It wasn't a history lesson. It was just so for the person who asked about your favorite scene, I would like to throw that out as one of the favorite scenes to read. But it was a really a beautiful opening to the book. How did you, here's another question. How did you decide on the title? Does the reference to the museum make sense to American readers? And were there any other variants of the title that you considered?
Okay, so titles, I did not know this before I embarked on this process, but in most circumstances, the publisher chooses the title for the book. And they didn't like my title because they felt it was too literary, and I wasn't married to my title, so I was fine with changing the title. But the title they wanted, I hated. I absolutely hated it. And so I went to my writers group. I was in this group of, I don't know, there's 6 or 7 of us. And I said, ladies, we can't leave here until we come up with a list of titles, because this can't happen. And I've told them I won't rest until I find something better than this. And I know we can find something better. And they wanted the title to have a very Russian reference to it. Now, the problem with this was if you're calling the city St. Petersburg or Leningrad. And in my book, it's both. So if you're calling it one or the other, it's a little bit confusing. Mm-hmm. So, one of my friends had this idea of using the Hermitage more, and it worked perfectly, because it is probably one of the only things that the name didn't change in St. Petersburg. So we came up with that title, and the publisher liked it, and I was really happy with that. because I think it's a great title, and they created a beautiful cover for the book as well that I just think is wonderfully evocative of the book. Yes, with the little footprints in the snow. The title, again, when they sent me the title, the cover, I was really worried that there would be backwards R's and bears and matryoshki, and I just didn't want it to be. I didn't want it to be red. I didn't want these cliche things, and I think the cover that they've created is I love it. It's perfect.
Do you want to share with us what your original title was?
My original title was Everything's Ahead. So to a Russian speaker, this makes sense. Mm-hmm. It means something, but because but to the it's a British publisher. They didn't like it, and I knew, I didn't think that title would stick. Many people had said to me the title's got to change. And I do think, the other question about the title was, I think most people, and especially most people who would be reading this book, they know the Hermitage Museum. So I think it does really well to put it into St. Petersburg, and people have an idea of what it is. So it's a good title for that.
Yeah, and I will note that the idea, or the phrase "everything's ahead," it is in the book. I mean, you do get to bring that into the story in a nice way. So
yeah, so it did connect to the book. So anyway, it all worked out. I'm just glad they didn't use the title that I didn't like.
What was that?
That was the painter of St. Petersburg.
Oh.
Which is like saying the actor of New York City or the taxi driver of London. There are many. I mean, I just thought that was a terrible title, especially after Gentleman in Moscow. Mm-hmm. I just didn't want that. It just wasn't right. It wasn't right at all. It wasn't. And also, I kind of felt like it was more like a decorator painter. I don't know. I didn't like it.
I agree. The Girl from the Hermitage is that works, and it's good.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about inspiration. The focus of this whole series really is about how Russian culture, Russian history, Russian art inspires the creation of more culture, art, history. What places in Moscow or St. Petersburg inspired you? Like when you had a quiet moment, I know there were no quiet moments in the 90s, but when you did have one, where would you go and just breathe in the place around you?
Yeah. In the 90s, all tickets were very affordable, whether it was to the conservatory or to theaters or to the opera. Everything was so accessible that I went to many, many things. And it was wonderful because I lived in the center of town, so it was very easy to get to things. And then it was also very inexpensive. And so I felt like I was up for, I'd try anything. Mm-hmm. And I loved the museums. I loved the Tretyakov. In St. Petersburg, I loved the Russian Museum and, of course, the Hermitage. I think all of that culture, I think especially in Moscow, the conservatory is lovely. I remember sitting in concerts like in the summertime when it's still really light and you're sitting there looking at all the paintings along the top of the where the ceiling meets the walls. And it's just, it has such a wonderful atmosphere in there. And I'm not an expert on classical music or anything like that, but it was just a wonderful place to sit and to listen to music. So that was wonderful.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed my time there.
I can relate. I think that's something that, so it's, I think what you're saying sounds like a typical American story. We don't have that sort of open cultural connection. And when I was there, I lived near the center too, and I would take the Green Line down to the center. But I would just every day basically stop by Tchaikovsky Hall just to see what they were playing, and I would just go in and hear concerts just because I could, and it really it changed my perspective on culture in many ways.
Yeah, and also all of the streets and being named after writers and painters, and we just don't have the same. It's just not the same where tube stations and all of this is named after writers and painters and different artists. So I think it's wonderful. It has a very rich culture, and really great.
And I think that's important for the creation of art. So I know that your current book is not about Russia, the one you're working on now. Maybe you'll go back to Russia in the future. Can you tell us sort of what your ideal trip, your return trip to Russia would be? I know that you were planning to go back. COVID canceled that. What does Russia hold for you in your future?
Yeah, in 2020, so my husband is English, but we met in Moscow. And so in 2020, that was our 20th anniversary, and my book was being published. So we thought, let's take the kids and go back and go to Moscow and see friends, and then go up to St. Petersburg. And we got the visas, we got everything all sorted, and then COVID happened. I think we were going to go in May of 2020, and then COVID hit, and we couldn't go, and so it's very sad, because now it's very difficult to imagine when we'll be able to go again. But mostly it's seeing friends, and my kids, because they've heard, they've met so many Russian, either friends that are Russian, or, we've always had this connection to Russia. We have these Russian paintings and then the book. And so they've grown up with this connection to Russia. So I think they were very excited to go too. So definitely, if I go back, when I go back, I'll definitely have to take the kids with me, because they definitely want to meet these Russian friends and see these places.
Someone asked, and I know well, I'm not sure what the answer is, but someone asked that you said the book has an open ending, which usually leads to part 2. Are you planning to write a sequel, or maybe another novel set in Russia?
So when I wrote this book, it was not with any intention of writing a second one. And I was kind of surprised when readers ask me, they kind of expect another book. And it's a strange thing, because I think a huge amount of time needs to pass in order to be able to write the rest, the continuation of this book. This one covers 70 years. So I'm not saying 70 years needs to pass, but I think you'd have to have 20 or so. And then it would have to be, Galina would have to die. And I just can't even imagine writing that scene. So I don't know. I'm struggling. I'm struggling with the idea of a sequel to it. It was never my intention to write a sequel. So we'll see. We'll see in time.
So you're working on another book now. And so how much credit do you give to Russia and your experience in Russia, and the topics that you covered in your first book? do you consider that like the starting point for your writing career in some way?
Of going to Russia and having those experiences? Really, yes. It took that long for me to digest it, but I never could have written this book without having lived there. There is no way I would have had the idea. I wouldn't have the painting. I wouldn't have had any, appreciation for any of it. There is just no way that I could have done this without having lived there. And I think writing the book, many years. So I left in 2000 and I started writing the book in 2015. So I had 15 years to grow up myself and look back on that time period. And it was wonderful because it was almost like I relived it and reconnected with this country that I came to love during that time period that I lived there. So yeah, it's been a good experience to get back connected to Russia.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of this. I think I've gone through all the questions, and it's been so great connecting with you about this book and about your experience there. And again, I mean, that's I think what is so important about this particular series is it's us talking about our experiences in Russia and how we've been inspired by Russia to create something beautiful. Because we go there and we see all of the beautiful culture and art. And then to come back here and create some is, I think, a special gift that we get from Russia. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. And I feel very privileged to be part of it. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And we'll post the link in the chat for those who want to get the book at the American Center's website and download it there. And that will wrap us up for today. So thank you, everybody. And we'll see you again in a week. Thank you.
Thank you.